You're listening to the Below the Surface podcast. I'm your host, Gunnar, and I have my co-host here, Hammond. James Hammond. I trust you well.
Good morning, Gunnar. I am very well. How about you?
I'm okay, thank you.
We haven't done an episode with just the two of us, so we'll try and keep ourselves on the rail. Hey, it'll be a banter lover's delight, I think, this episode. A cornucopia of delights.
There's certainly some potential for some rants in there, yes.
I like it.
All right.
So we've got a couple of things here. I thought we haven't done housekeeping for a while, so there are a couple of things we wanted to talk about before we get stuck into it.
Okay, keep house then.
So, look, yeah, I'll keep it short. I just wanted to note the Clarence coal mine prosecution and the penalty that was handed down for that recently. It was to do with discharges from the Clarence coal mine into the Wollongambie River, which is part of a World Heritage Area in the Blue Mountains. The reason it caught my attention was because it was a massive penalty. So it was $815,000 in penalties in total. That was about a $540K fine, $185K of legal costs, and another $86K towards some rehabilitation work. So it's definitely up there. It's on the higher end of POEO penalties. It's not the biggest penalty that's ever been handed down. I think that dubious honour still is also with the Clarence coal mine, but it's from a previous prosecution in 2017. The reason I think it's interesting is because there were a number of offences involved, but one of the offences that the EPA pursued was around not testing a pollution incident response management plan, or a PIRMP is the acronym that we use. So a PIRMP is it's a requirement for all licensed sites. It's the first instance of anyone ever being prosecuted for the offence of not testing it. They have to be tested at least once every 12 months. So it'd be a bit of a precedent for that, and probably give the EPA a bit more backing, I guess, when they're trying to enforce that requirement. We deal with PIRMs a lot with our clients, and I thought I'd drop a couple of tips. So in relation to PIRMs, I actually design them to be tested every 10 or 11 months rather than every 12 months because it's easy to kind of slip and all of a sudden you're outside of the 12-month window. So I actually schedule.
How long did the Clarence coal mine not test theirs?
It was 280-something days overdue, I think, or...
Overdue?
Yeah, 200. Yeah, it's 200 and something days overdue. So it was, significantly overdue. It hadn't been tested for some time. The other thing is that tests really need to be documented. So you can't just have a table that says, yeah, we did a test. You need to document it properly. You need to have the details of people who attended, what did you do, all that sort of thing. And the other thing I wanted to just remind people of, if they're not aware, is that there is a guideline from the EPA about PIRMs. 2022 was the most recent version of that guideline. And it actually specifies in there, it's kind of buried in there, but it says if you've got a licensed site that has what's called a level 3 risk rating, which is the highest risk category, you have to do a practical drill at least once every 2 years. And if you have a level 2 risk rating, you have to do a practical drill at least once every 3 years. So yeah, a lot of sites rely on desktop drills where you'll sit down and talk through an incident, but particularly for those higher risk levels, you have to do practical drills.
So you have to actually let some water out into the river and see what happens? Is that
That's right, and try and stop it.
Yeah. That's just this.
Yeah, no, but seriously, I've gotten 44-gallon drums, filled them up with water, tip them over, get the guys to use the spill kits, stop it going into the drain, call the EPA hotline. You've got to run through the whole thing. Spills are one thing. You can have fires in waste facilities. You can have all sorts of different stuff. So yeah, a few points there, because people often kind of PIRMs are a bit of an afterthought, but they are important. And I think the EPA will have a bit more gusto in going after them now.
$800 and something thousand sounds like a lot. I don't know how much it is for a coal mine.
I don't know how coal mines are doing these days. I'm sure they're still doing pretty well.
I have a feeling this isn't something where someone sits there and says, ouch, man, that really hurts now. I don't know. I really don't know. But
yeah. Yeah, I don't know either. It's definitely up there in terms of the scale of penalties that have been applied under POEO, but how much it hurts the bottom line, hard to say.
Yeah. Okay. That's a mine near Lithgow, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a relatively easy solution for all this. Shut the mines down. How does that sound? Come on, guys. How long have we been doing this now? Digging dirt out of the ground.
That's it. I mean, New South Wales did announce the other day, right? They're not approving any new coal mines, which was a pretty big deal, actually. So, yeah, it's definitely coal's on the way out for sure.
One would hope. Yes, one would hope.
So what did you want to talk about, Gunnar?
Oh, okay. I have something that's been on my mind for a long, long time, and it's very quick. It's a message to the auditors. When you send out an email to your client and you CC the environmental consultant with your interim audit advice, please start your email off with a sentence saying, "Thank you for that report. I have reviewed it. Great report. I'm very happy." Regardless of whether you're happy with it or not, it doesn't matter. Okay, so you say this was a great report. Well done. However, there are a few comments that I have, and they are hereby attached. And then you go on in the comments. The most important thing here is that the client, so my client and your client, dear auditor, they will read that sentence and say, okay, fair enough, this is good. They will think, I hired a good consultant, very good. And they also think, this process is on the way, everything is fine and honky-dory. Clients will then hardly ever proceed and read the detailed comments in the report, which they hardly ever understand anyway. So that's all I'm saying. Is like if it makes, I know one auditor does that, and it is so good when I work with him. It always starts off, well done, great report, minor comments attached. This is such an easy thing to do, and it smooths over. Because if you don't start like that, then the client, my client and your client, starts opening that spreadsheet or however you submit your comments and sees 20, 30, sometimes even more comments and thinks, man, what is going on in this process here? I paid for a report and everything seems to be wrong in here.
Yep. Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a nice courtesy, I think, and auditors don't have to do it, but I mean, It certainly makes a big difference for us who are dealing with that pointy end of the client. It happens all the time, doesn't it, Gunnar, with comments that are given without that bit of context, particularly if it's a client you haven't worked with before. It can create a bit of doubt in their mind about, have we engaged the right people here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the feedback from the auditor is kind of like, thanks, this is a decent quality report, but here's some comments and questions.
Yeah. That's really all there is to it. I just thought I mentioned it here.
Same thing goes for regulators, by the way. I've had regulatory letters come back where it's not even a factual issue. It's a difference of opinion around something that is a grey area, and the way that the regulator has framed it is that, the consultant is wrong, and when they're just expressing an opinion. And that has created some tension with clients in the past about, who do I believe here? Do I believe the regulator or do I believe my consultant? Yeah. So a bit of context and courtesy goes a long way.
Then, gosh, I have already ranted in our internal chat about this, but
the message you sent, Gunnar, it wasn't a hot take. It was a boiling take. It was like, wow, hot off the presses, You saw this thing and just unloaded.
See if I can control myself here. Okay. Poor Amy, she's going to flip out, I can tell you. So.
Gunnar rant alert. Proceed with caution.
The EPA has released a statement about Roselle interchange. And basically what it says is Tony Chappell, I don't know if I should say friend, but our
friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast. Fan of the podcast. Staunch supporter, has released a statement where the EPA fined the two contractors, I forgot their name now, the two contractors involved in the Roselle interchange. It's not a fine, I think, but they have agreed to pay $150,000 as part of and I don't know what it is. Okay,
it's an enforceable undertaking.
Okay, and Mr. Chappell says, while we acknowledge the joint venture did not produce the mulch, they delivered the interchange project, so had a responsibility to ensure that contaminated material was not brought onto the site as part of the works. Okay, so I read this and I'm thinking, next sentence then really got me going. It is vital that steps are taken to ensure compliance with the mulch order 2016. That's when I hit the roof. Okay. Mm-hmm. Like, Tony, you know that nobody can actually comply with that order. It drives me absolutely nuts. Nothing about this here has anything to do with contamination or risk or what happened or will improve anything that has happened. Because what has happened in the past is that there is orders out that no one can comply with. And in the orders, they are so vaguely worded that basically, it must not contain any asbestos.
Yeah, that's the line.
Okay. Can we start with the problem and not saying, gosh, although you didn't make any mistakes, guys, it's still, you should have made sure that the material that you brought on the site wasn't contaminated. First of all, no. Okay, I know you and we are of a different opinion here. But if I go to Bunnings and buy some I don't know, potting mix, it's not up to me to determine whether this is contaminated or not. At some stage, you have to trust that what you buy is what it says. Okay, when I go to Macca's, I don't have to test the lead levels in my burger. So that's my opinion of this. And the second thing is, like, what caused all this? What caused this mulch problem that we have here? Not only an order that can't be complied with, but we also don't have the technical abilities to comply with, and we don't have the lab methods to comply with. Yeah. So it's impossible. So can we stop it about, it's important that we all comply with the mulch order 2016. And then to come along and say, they didn't make any mistakes. It wasn't really their fault, but, they pay $150,000 again, Again, they're sitting there thinking, all right, if that's what it takes to get us out of this problem, fine. But what was the problem? What was the problem? Number one, the EPA issues orders that can't be complied with. That's the first problem, right? Mm-hmm. Number two, then something happens and the EPA comes along and panics, completely freaks out and issues very hasty cleanup orders. Without looking, is there actually a risk here? Is there something happening that we need to worry about? No. That would be too easy. No, the only problem they saw was, did somebody, oh my God, not comply with the POEO Act? That one goddamn POEO Act section that we all know is so overdue for an overhaul, especially when it comes to the definition of asbestos waste. Is there a risk? Didn't matter. Did somebody actually cause contamination as defined in the CLM Act? Turns out nobody did, right? Mm-hmm. So was there contamination? No. But at that stage, no, let's not investigate that. Let's all flip out and scare the living daylights out of everybody in Sydney. Yeah. Shut down schools, shut down public parks, and let's make sure that it looks like we're doing something in the media while the media is having a frenzy. So that's the second thing that was a problem. Yeah. So who else screwed up? I almost said fucked up, but I might as well.
I warned everybody this is going to be a boiling take.
SafeWorks screwed up for the same reason, If the EPA flips out and says, let's issue a cleanup order, SafeWorks could have easily come out and said, can we just calm down and have a look what's really happening here? Is there actually a risk? Now, SafeWorks, I gotta give them a pass here because public parks aren't really workplaces, are they? I know, park rangers and so on, but ultimately, SafeWorks involvement in that whole scenario is already a stretch, if you ask me. So that's why another thing that I think is kind of ridiculous is the $150,000, call it a fine or whatever you want to call it, okay, goes to SafeWorks, who are really only marginally involved in all this. But okay, so who else could have done much better? Man, I'm so on a roll here. Who else? Well, I'm very sorry to say, but for example, our industry representatives, EIA-NZ, the Environmental Institute for Australia and New Zealand, ALGA, the Australian Land and Groundwater Association, I give those two a little bit of a pass. But mostly the ACLCA, the Australian Contaminated Land Consultants Association. Where were you all? Where were you self-professed leaders of our industry? As far as public statements are concerned, you were nowhere to be found. I know where you were because you were busy lining up, putting in tenders and doing the work that may or may not have been necessary to be done, but it was called for in a Sydney-wide panic. Yeah. But, we're all for the environment and we provide world-class assessments. So those bodies, they also screwed up because they did not stand up and issue a proper statement saying, stop everybody, stop the panic. We have the tools to assess all this. We do this
Yeah.
every day. This isn't something that suddenly hits us out of the blue. We assess asbestos in soil all the time. But dear astute leaders of the industry, all of you could have come out and called for calm. Like, for example, the FAMANZ, the Faculty of Asbestos Management in Australia and New Zealand. They did that.
Yeah.
They released a statement on their website calling for calm and saying, hey,
Yeah.
let's just settle down here for a second, right? So there you go. So the question is, in what way does this statement address any of the problems we've had? It doesn't. It's a statement that is a political statement that makes the EPA look like they're doing something and pushing the responsibility onto others and not onto the EPA, sticking to a POEO Act section only that then caused the mess that we were in. All this, to me, this is just incredible. I can't believe it. You know what this reads like? It reads like a headline from The Onion. Regulator issuing mulch order commends itself for holding others accountable. This is the kind of stuff that the writers of Utopia would be proud of. But even they can't come up with stuff like this. You know the greatest thing that came out of Mulchgate? You know what?
What?
This podcast. Because you and I sat there and you're like, okay, this has to stop. Right? This
Enough's enough.
Enough is enough. Okay? We
Well,
can only take that much nonsense at one time. Okay?
Well, that was one of the all-time Gunnar rants.
But man, I tell you what, I feel so much better. And you know what? I'm the one editing it, so let's see how much makes it into the public.
Leave it all in. We've told off it. EPA, safe work. So, yes, I agree with a lot of what you've said. I think I do have some different opinions on some of what you've said, but I'm going to keep my powder dry because I think that we need a full episode on this issue once it's kind of reached a conclusion. So I agree with you. With the enforceable undertaking, that 150 grand is going towards asbestos education, I believe, is what it said, which you kind of question. I mean, how does that address the root cause of the problem here? This wasn't an identification problem. The one thing I would say is, like, obviously, this whole saga is still ongoing, right? So Green Life is still in the courts. So that prosecution is still underway. We don't know how that's going to end up. And we don't know what other outcomes there's going to be with other parties, right? It's certainly a weird development. When we have the full picture at the end, we'll pick through it all and assess what's happened. Yeah, because certainly there has been very little or potentially no action to address the root cause of this whole situation today.
Isn't that what I said, like what I calmly mentioned a few minutes ago here?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's right. And I think you're right to be frustrated because we've had the chief scientist report and then...
Yeah, the chief scientist report. Don't get me going on that one.
Nothing has happened.
Anyway, Tony, please, I know you're listening. Please come back on and explain to me in what way you think this is a good solution or even interim solution or any solution or any... Is this? I just don't get it.
Yeah. I guess the question is, like, how does that 150K towards asbestos education, like, how does that link to the root cause of this whole saga? Yeah. What is the link there?
Well, there isn't one.
And how do we actually resolve the problem that created this whole situation?
That would be something we should address.
It really needs a whole episode, I think, and, to do a bit of a deep dive. Also because you touched on the complexities between the waste framework and the contaminated land framework and how they don't line up. Just because something doesn't meet a resource recovery order does not mean that it is contaminated for the purposes of site suitability. There's also all this other stuff around, Australian consumer law and the fact that recovered materials are a product. Exactly like you said, we don't test every product that we buy because we are comfortable in taking at face value that it is acceptable to be used for what it's meant to be used for. So yeah, we've got to stop thinking about recycled materials as waste and start thinking of them as products as well and kind of look at them in that frame. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we've got to get into.
It's a mess. And as soon as you let lawyers decide what needs to happen, it's always a bit of a problem because they look at the world slightly differently than us engineers, for example.
Yeah.
So yes, I agree. But man, really what should have happened is instead of panicking and issuing cleanup orders, can we all sit back for a few hours and have a look? Do we really need to scare the living daylights out of 5 million people?
We both agree that the communication of this whole thing when it happened was
Quite as bad as
really, really bad.
It's just shocking.
Yeah. The risk
Mm.
communication was really bad. And that has contributed to the situation now where the EPA feels very much that it needs to be seen to be taking significant action and is maybe doing some stuff that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Maybe we should quickly ask Professor Claire Hooker back on the podcast and say, she's a risk communications expert. I wonder what she has to say about it.
And dissect that whole thing. Yeah.
Where did all this go wrong? We can see where it went wrong technically.
Yeah.
Enough of that.
Yeah. So we'll revisit this in a structured way. I think once the green life stuff is all done and dusted, we can sort of go through it step by step.
So this was supposed to be up to 5 minutes. We are in 25 minutes into the podcast, which is good because the rest of the podcast looks just damn boring to me, I have to say.
Well, I was going to say time flies when you're having fun. So the next half an hour might drag for you, Gunnar.
I'm afraid. So the video is on. If I nod off, okay, just call me on the phone.
I don't know. I'll have to call Lou or something, get her to throw a glass of water on you or something. Well, yeah. So thanks, Gunnar. What I thought would be nice and a bit of fun to talk about was I've had this idea for an episode for a while, and my working title is The Negotiator. And I want to talk a little bit about my time working in international environmental negotiations and what that was all about.
Have you seen the movie The Negotiator with Kevin Spacey and Samuel L. Jackson? It came out in 1998, I think.
No, I don't think I have. I don't think so. What's it about?
A hostage negotiator. Duh. Let me think. What could this movie be all about?
So yeah, my experience wasn't quite as high stakes as those sort of Hollywood hostage negotiations.
I didn't know you were negotiating international treaties on behalf of Australia. I'm suddenly impressed with you, Hammond.
It sounds impressive, doesn't it? It was a really enjoyable part of my career. This is about 10 years ago now, when I was working with the Commonwealth Department of the Environment. I did a few different things over that time, but the last 2 years that I was there was spent in the team that managed an international agreement called the Convention on Biological Diversity. I'll take you through what the international meetings actually looked like and what they were like sort of day to day. Because that was the really fun part, because there's all this, the Conference of the Parties, which is the big meeting where everybody goes, they happen once every 2 years. And there's this big lead up, 90% of the negotiation is kind of done before you even get to the meeting, all via emails and other sort of meetings where you're on European time. So you're doing it at 3 a.m. or whatever it is. All that hard work gets done in the lead up. So that's the grind. And then the actual meetings themselves are very enjoyable. But I wanted to ask you a question, Gunnar. I mean, so the word negotiation can kind of throw people off a little bit. Like, what does that word mean to you?
Just jump something like this on me. Warn me. I can prepare and sound smart. Jeez. Negotiations.
I wanted your raw take on it.
Well, I guess is negotiations the process of finding an agreement between parties that don't necessarily agree on a subject.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that's a good definition. I mean, the way I think my take on this has changed over time, where I think a lot of people think about negotiation like it's these defined things where it might be, you're negotiating a pay rise or you're trying to buy something and you're negotiating around it or whatever it is. But I've really come to realize that negotiation is just what we do constantly every single day. I would say that a lot of the interactions that we have with other people are negotiations, in that you have something that you want, other people have things that they want, and you're trying to work it out between you as to where that all lands. And yes, there are skills around negotiating. So investing and learning in those skills and kind of looking into this more can actually help you, not just in those formal settings, but in your everyday life. So I wanted to start with just a bit of a overview about the United Nations framework and treaties in general. Do you have a take on the UN framework? Like, if you have much exposure to it, or like, what's your level of understanding?
Zero. I'm very skeptical about the UN and its roles. And I'm not saying abolish it. All I'm saying is it all sounds so nice that we have the United Nations and whatever they come up with, gets stuck to or not. Right? Until someone says, I don't like this anymore. Remember, Kyoto was signed in 1996, I think. Okay, until it gets kind of inconvenient, then suddenly it's like, you know what, it didn't really mean it. Or there's a few hundred coal miners. What are we going to do with them? This is taken seriously because until someone comes along and says, nah, I don't think we want to do that anymore. War has officially been outlawed since 1928. Obviously, it didn't prevent the Second World War either, right? But the UN didn't exist back then. But then after the Second World War, it was again confirmed. I forgot now what it's called, and that doesn't mean anything. And then there's international treaties, and then some orange golf player comes along and says, what are you going to do?
It's interesting that you mentioned the orange elephant in the room. I think that's why this is also front of mind for me, is because, like you said, there are a lot of international norms and systems that are really being either completely torn up or radically changed. So it's an interesting time in international law and in foreign relations. I definitely take your point, and I understand the skepticism about it. I do think that the UN system is important in a globalized world. We also have what I would refer to as global environmental commons, and they are things like the atmosphere, oceans, and some domestic areas that are of global significance, like, for example, the Great Barrier Reef. It's these shared areas where you really do need to cooperate to manage them. Otherwise, everybody's individual interests will end up ruining them. And the atmosphere is the perfect example. There's no boundaries. It flows throughout the globe. It must be managed on a global scale. And I'm talking just about environmental stuff here. I'm not going to talk about security and trade and all those other elements, but we'll leave them to others to talk about. But some of the treaties and international agreements people might be aware of is, you touched on it there, Gunnar, so the UNFCCC, so that's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that's where the Kyoto Protocol is a subset of that. Some others that people might have heard of is the Basel Convention, which is regarding persistent organic pollutants. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. That's the international convention that has outlawed the movement of ivory from elephant tusks and rhino horns and all those sorts of products that come from endangered species. And another example is the World Heritage Convention, which, again, people would be aware of. Great Barrier Reef, for example, is a World Heritage Area. I think the UNFCCC, like you touched on, the Kyoto Protocol, being, I would say, a failure. I think it's fair to say that the UNFCCC has been a failure in terms of stopping, slowing and then stopping runaway climate change, I guess, and controlling greenhouse gas emissions. But one example of a really good success of international environmental treaties was the Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. So
I was about to say we had some success in the 90s with the ozone layer, and that was before scientists and science was politicized, right?
Well, yeah, I think that definitely has something to do with it. I think that the other component is that we understood the problem, that it was those substances that were creating a hole in the ozone layer down near Australia, if anyone doesn't know. But they were limited in their scope and application, right? So they were used in refrigerants and they were used in a range of other things. And it was a small subset of society that was economically impacted by phasing CFCs out. It was a much easier proposition to say, we've got this issue, we know what it is, it only affects a relatively small number of people, the economic cost is small, and therefore we can kind of deal with it fairly easily. So that was a great success, I think, of international frameworks. Specifically, what I wanted to talk about is a treaty called the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is probably not as well known as some of these other ones, but it's the main convention that deals with biodiversity worldwide. And it was created in 1992. So, yeah, again, it's been around for quite a long time.
It's funny you say that. We're now here in 1992, and that was fairly recent. And you say, whoa, this has been around for a long time.
Yeah. It's all relative, isn't it? That's fine. So the aims of that convention are around conserving biodiversity throughout the world. Also, the fair use of genetic resources. So again, it's got almost universal membership. So there's 196 member states, And that's almost every single country in the world. There's only a handful that are not signatory to this convention. The most notable exception is the United States.
Now, of course, a country that can't get their measurements together, of course they wouldn't sign something like this. Yeah, fine.
Yeah, so the United States is a weird player in international treaties. I mean, we won't go into this in any detail, right? But they are a bit of a weird player. They've signed the treaty, but they haven't ratified it. So for anyone who's not aware, with international treaties, a country signs the treaty, but then they have to go home and what's called ratify, which basically means they have to implement what they've said they're going to do by signing through domestic legislation. So the US has basically said, yeah, the CBD sounds all well and good, happy to sign it, but then they've gone home and they haven't done anything about it. So they attend the meetings and what have you, but unless a country is ratified, they actually don't get a vote in any sort of meeting. They don't get a formal say in any of the meetings as to how the convention operates. The thing with ratification, right, is that once a country has ratified, it is then bound under that treaty to implement the treaty's provisions domestically within their own country. And as part of the, I guess, checks and balances for that, any party to that treaty has to submit national reports on a regular basis. And those reports have to outline how they are achieving the objectives of the convention domestically. So, and then, enforcement and that.
Yeah, I was
that sort
about
of
to
thing
say,
is not
if you
really...
don't do your homework, what happens? Nothing.
Look, they call international law soft law for a reason, right? You're not going to get pulled in front of the International Court of Justice or whatever it is for not fulfilling your CBD requirements, right? But it is more about diplomatic implications and that sort of thing that come from not holding up your end of the bargain. Why does it matter that Australia is a party to the CBD? There's actually a really important reason why it is helpful for Australia to be a party to this convention. And I want to touch on this thing that's called Commonwealth Heads of Power or Constitutional Heads of Power. So the Commonwealth government cannot just make laws about whatever they want, right? So everyone would know in Australia we've got 3 levels of government: Commonwealth, state, and local government. And there is a split of responsibilities between those 3 levels of government, right? It's meant to reduce the level of overlap or duplication between them. So in the Constitution of Australia, there are a range of things that are set out, and they are called the heads of power, and they define the things that the Commonwealth can make laws about. And they include things like taxation, international trade, this sort of stuff, right? The environment is not one of the things that is mentioned in the Constitution. Yep. So when it comes to national legislation like the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, the EPBC Act, which is our main national environmental act, the only reason that can come about is through a head of power called foreign affairs power. And what that means is that the Commonwealth is enabled to make legislation around the environment because they've entered into an international treaty related to those matters. If it wasn't for the fact that Australia was a party to those international treaties, that piece of legislation could not exist. It would be unconstitutional for the Commonwealth to make those laws. So that's just a really kind of clear example as to why these international treaties matter. Some might say, why should they do that? Because it duplicates something that the state should be doing. But I would argue that there is a role for national government in managing the environment, because environmental issues don't stop at state boundaries. There are things that are genuinely in the national interest. And also the Commonwealth government has resources that the states don't. The NEPM, like you mentioned before, that's slightly different. I was kind of hoping that I'd come to this with a zinger and say the NEPM wouldn't exist if it wasn't for international law, but I can't do that. The NEPM is actually a different form of things. It's basically where the states have got together.
The National Environmental Protection Measure for those people who are not in the why they would be listening anyway. I'm just.
It's almost like that's almost like a password, I think, to get access to this podcast.
Yes, if you don't know what the NEPM
What's the
is,
NEPM?
Don't listen to this podcast. Okay.
Yeah. And we say it all the time, right? But we're talking about the ASC NEPM, the Assessment of Site Contamination NEPM, because there are others about air quality and stuff. But that the National Environment Protection Council Act, which is the legislation that creates the body that creates NEPMs, that's slightly different. That's the states coming together and saying, we all have responsibility for environmental management, environmental law, but we're going to voluntarily agree to come together and create this national framework, which we're then going to implement at a state level through state legislation. So it's more of a cooperative
you should have roped
version of this.
Sarah Mansfield or Elizabeth Weil or Darren Beek into this, and not me. I mean,
Well,
I'm suffering here.
This kind of brings me back to, sorry, Gunnar, this is probably going to be a lot of me talking, and I'm trying not to nerd out on this stuff, right? But bringing it back to my time doing this stuff, I found it really interesting because I'm a scientist by background, and I was working in this team, and I'm working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade all the time. And I'm dealing with lawyers all the time.
Oh, tough.
Most of these people are lawyers, right? That's who normally does international law. I'm just a poor scientist who's found myself thrown into this thing and trying to get my head around all this stuff that was very, very new to me.
I love the photo you sent me. I think we should make that the episode graphic because
I
was
think so. Yeah,
a very young Hammond with some of your negotiation partners there. There's a sign saying, Australia. That's certainly a reason to be proud of when you represented Australia. Tell me, what did you negotiate? What's the negotiation? What happened?
I was lucky enough to go to 2 international meetings. So I got to go to something called, this is a terrible acronym, it's called SUBSTA 20, which is the subsidiary body on scientific something or other. I actually can't remember what it is. It's an interim meeting that happens between the Conference of the Parties. So the Conference of the Parties is the big one where all 196 countries and all these other non-government organizations get together. This is all under the UN. So the Convention on
Biological Diversity. Where did you go? Zurich,
is
Vienna, New York?
The scientific body meeting, which was the interim meeting, that was in Montreal.
Okay.
It was a very cool experience, a massive room with the big UN banner on the front. So that was in 2016. And then I got to go to the Conference of the Party, number 13, so the 13th meeting. And that was in Cancun, Mexico in 2016.
So it's funny, they always pick places that really suck, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Davos and Monte Carlo and Cancun. Yeah, it's like, let's battle it. Let's the hardship must be tremendous.
I know, right? We were staying in an all-inclusive resort in Cancun.
Of course, you wouldn't want to mingle with the Mexicans, would you? Like, come on.
Well, we did get a day off and we went out to Chichen Itza and a few other places around and saw what we could see. But
did you go to a Taco Bell to get some decent local food?
Yeah, that's it. A real taste of the locals. So these meetings are held in these kinds of places because they're central and they're nice to go to and they have the facilities, I guess, to handle these sorts of things. So Montreal was great. So the subsidiary meeting in Montreal was awesome. But that was a kind of a warm-up. That was the first international meeting I'd been to. To give a bit of a sense as to what the COP is like I said, there's 196 nation states that are party to the convention, and each of them will send a delegation of, I think the Australian delegation to that COP was about 5 or 6 people.
Give me the acronym COP again.
Conference of the Parties. So this is where all the parties to the convention get together to vote on resolutions, right? So that is the purpose of the COP, is to come together, and there's a whole bunch of resolutions that are about advancing the objectives of that treaty. And that is where all that discussion happens, and that's where the agreement and what they call resolutions. So the negotiation centers around the content of those resolutions. I should mention here that the CBD works on a consensus basis. So some other treaties work on majority rules and other sort of formats, but the CBD is a consensus treaty. So all parties need to agree to the resolutions that are finalized, right? And so that's why
I have a family of 5. Process. We can't agree on which restaurant we go on. This is you have 130. How many? 190 countries.
196.
Yeah, come on. This is a setup for failure. There's at least 10% kooks in there, right? For sure.
Oh, there's definitely some agitators for sure. I mean, every country of the world almost is represented here. Yeah, and that includes some pretty wacky.
I can't
ones,
even
right?
agree. I'll believe in or don't, let alone.
Well, that's the thing, and you would think that this thing was doomed to fail, but the vast majority, I would say 98% of resolutions that are passed in the CBD, they are agreed on consensus. And there's 2 parts of that. One part is that they can be a bit watered down with consensus, and that can be a criticism of it. But occasionally resolutions do get passed by the vast majority of parties, and there might be 1 or 2 dissenting parties that say basically, we don't agree, but all 194 countries agree, but 2 don't. And they just kind of note their dissent, but it passes otherwise. Some countries send delegations of 20 or 30 people. And then you've got other non-government organizations that come along, all the big NGOs that people would be familiar with and a lot of smaller ones that people wouldn't have heard of. They all send delegations too. So what you end up with is thousands and thousands of people staying in the one place, basically. And this room with hundreds and hundreds of people sitting there. And then there are a whole bunch of other kind of breakout rooms and smaller rooms where that's where a lot of the more detailed negotiation about particular topics happens. We actually didn't have a big enough delegation to go to all of those side discussions. So we just had to pick the ones that were most relevant to Australia. I had carriage of a couple of items. One of them in particular was around Indigenous peoples and their access, particularly as it relates to genetic resources.
Genetic resources?
Yeah, so this is like, a pharmaceutical company goes out to the Amazon and collects a whole bunch of different plants and animals and what have you and tries to distill compounds from them to test whether they can be effective against various diseases and that sort of thing. So pharmaceutical company A finds this amazing compound in some Amazonian plant that treats cancer, right? And the question is, who has ownership over that genetic resource that was taken from the Amazon? It can be quite a complex thing as to kind of who has the ownership and therefore who should have a share of the benefits that come from the use of that genetic resource. So what it was like at these meetings, it's like the definition of work hard, play hard. You're at a resort, you're in Cancun. It sounds pretty amazing. And it was amazing. And there was a lot of fun elements to it. But man, we really worked hard. I'm talking massive, massive hours. But then whenever we did get a break, there was always functions on, various countries put on welcome functions, or the EU is hosting this thing, or the Danes are hosting a dinner, or whatever it is. We went for about 10 days. So it went over the kind of 2 weeks, and there was a weekend in the middle. And on the weekend, everyone takes a break, and the Mexicans hosted like a cop party, essentially, on the Saturday night, and the tequila and the mezcal is flowing, and everyone has an awesome time. So the thing is, you're always representing your country at these things. So you have to conduct yourself obviously in a professional manner. But if you can manage to maintain your professionalism, you can have a really, really good time at these events. And I had an awesome time. I worked extremely hard and worked 14-hour days most days, but I also found some time to have some really nice socializing and met a lot of really awesome, interesting people from lots of different countries, not just countries that are aligned with Australia. It really broadened my horizons. And those meetings actually were a big part of what caused me to then start 4 Pillars when I came back to Sydney. So it was really quite a pivotal time in my life.
So our next yearly celebrations we're going to have in Cancun?
Yeah, sounds good to me. At the all-inclusive resort. Yeah.
With the Rudy Hill RSL will have to do.
Yeah. It's not quite there, but, maybe one day. It was quite an experience. Like, there's just so much that I could say about it. Australia is what's called a middle power. So we're not one of the dominant players in international matters, but we're kind of a glue that can bring some of the bigger powers together. And Australia is part of a group called JUZCANS, which is a kind of an informal grouping of countries that tend to vote as a bloc. And what that is basically just a group of countries that are typically smaller countries or sort of middle powers that come together and try to vote together in UN forums to give themselves a greater amount of power. And the perfect example of that is the EU. Member states of the EU do not vote individually. They vote as the EU. They're on the same footing as, the United States doesn't get a vote in the CBD, but they're on the same footing as, the larger nations like China, like Russia. So Australia was part of an informal group called JUZCANS, which, if I can get this right, there are a number of other states that are a part of it, but the acronym is made up of Japan, the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So they are the countries that sort of lead that group. Now, the US obviously is not a party, like we've said, but the US is involved in JUZCANS, and the US basically tries to influence and get what it wants through working with countries that are actually a party and actually do have a vote. There are a number of other countries, some European countries that are outside of the EU that are part of JUZCANS as well. So in between the main COP sessions, we would get together and try and come up with our own position that we all agreed with, that we could then, when we get into the main room with all 196 countries in there, one member of JustCans puts forward their position, and then all the other members of JustCans can jump in and say, yes, we support Australia, we support Canada, we support it, and it creates this kind of momentum. Australia doesn't go in there just kind of voting for things on its own. It has these informal coalitions with other countries to try and increase its level of power.
Like a survivor.
Exactly. You don't want to be on your
have
own.
a lot.
If you look at how the US is acting at the moment, it's acting as if it doesn't need anybody else in the world. And the reality is that one country like the US or China is bigger and more powerful than any other country, any other individual country, but they are not more powerful than all other countries or even a group of other countries. So yes, they are the most powerful player in the room, but it doesn't mean that they can just go around doing whatever they want, because if you get a coalition of other nations that will stand against you, that's something that they're not going to be able to overcome. So I think the US and some other big countries like to behave like they don't need to be part of, any kind of international coordination or effort. I think the Americans are finding out now that just going it alone and burning all your bridges with your allies is not an effective way to get things done. I'll take it back a bit. I'm conscious of time.
I was about to say, do you see the little clock at the bottom here?
I do see the little clock. So there are just so many things I could talk about. I mean, I'm sure you can tell I just love this time in my career. It was amazing. But I want to just take it a bit of a step back and just talk a little bit about negotiating principles and sort of how I upskilled and how I developed those skills. I kind of sharpened them at those meetings and continue to sharpen them, right? I think when people can think of negotiating or good negotiators, they often think of the harsh, powerful, forceful kind of approach, right? So that steamroller kind of approach where somebody comes in, they're dominant, they have all the power, they say, we've got all the cards. And I think some people often think of that as like, that is the winning approach to negotiation. And the reality is that the vast majority of negotiations that we would have in our day-to-day lives and at meetings like this, it just doesn't work. It's just not an effective way to get things done. And it's really more about talking things through, understanding where your counterpart is coming from, and trying to understand if there's a way for you to actually both get what you want or close to it. And so I think that I have some traits that I've found through doing this, I think that are helpful in those situations. And they are traits like I'm pretty level-headed. I tend to be able to stay fairly calm in most situations. I'm pretty open-minded about things. I don't have a whole lot of fixed opinions or positions about stuff. I'm willing to kind of see things from other people's point of view. And I'm genuinely curious about other people and about learning. When you're having a conversation with a counterpart that you're trying to negotiate something with and you want different things, you're trying to talk to them and understand where they're coming from and tease out information from them that could help you come to a point where you can both agree. If you're genuinely curious about somebody else, that comes across in the conversation. If you're putting it on just so you can tease out information and you're not genuinely interested, people catch on to that pretty quickly. So there are these interpersonal skills that I think really play into all this. I'm going to mention just a few, I guess, resources that I found particularly helpful in developing these skills, and I'll link them in the show notes. There's 3 books that have been particularly influential on me. The first one is called Getting to Yes. The second one is called Never Split the Difference. And the third one is called Rapport. Now, rapport is not really about negotiation. It's more about interpersonal relations and building rapport with people. So the first one is that preparation is critical. If you're going into a negotiation unprepared, it's not going to work out well. The more you can prepare for negotiation and the better informed you can be, not just about finding things out about your counterpart, but also understanding where you're coming from. Because one thing that Getting to Yes and Never Split the Difference talk about is that the concept of positional negotiation, where you say, this is my position and that's where I'm at and I'm not going to move that position. So unless you can meet me there, we're not getting a deal done. You're going to end up walking away from a lot of negotiations, basically. It's not an effective way to get things done. Preparation and understanding where you're coming from and the reason why you have a position is really, really important, because if you understand why you have a particular position, if people introduce alternatives or things shift, you can kind of shift along with it and you have a better chance of getting an agreement. The second point I want to mention is that you kind of remove emotion from negotiation, right? We're all people at the end of the day. Getting to Yes is written by Harvard professors, and they like to sort of pretend like emotion doesn't come into things and you can just be purely objective when you're talking about outcomes that people want. But the reality that Never Split the Difference brings in is that we're emotional beings, right? And so there's a layer of emotion and personality that always sits over the top of objective reality. And so you shouldn't ignore that. You should work with it and understand what things work to manage and navigate that emotional layer. The third point I already touched on, which is you really do need a genuine interest in your counterpart. They use the term tactical empathy, which is it's a bit of a weird term, but this is the term that they use and Never Split the Difference. This is all about understanding your counterpart's point of view. And this is not necessarily about accepting their point of view. You don't have to agree with what they're saying, but you need to understand what they think and why they think it. Jump in, Gunnar, if you want.
Never mind.
Are you loving this? Are you loving this or what?
No. I'm already worried about our download numbers here. It's like, man.
I'd be really interested to see what our listeners think. This is just fun for me. Even if nobody listens to it, I'm having a good time.
I'm glad someone is. Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference, right?
Yeah, great book.
Yeah. I listened to him I'm a big fan of Sam Harris's podcast, so I listened to him on Sam Harris. As you mentioned it, I'm like, hang on, I know this book. And Sam Harris spoke very highly of it, and then I hear it from other parties, and I'm like, okay, I gotta read this book. God, is this boring? Jesus, this is a terrible book for me. It's like I open this book, I start reading it.
Yeah.
Give me some meat here. All right, so I'm like, all right, I put that book aside and got myself a condensed version on the internet, like, because I can't read this book, right? And even the condensed version is just batshit boring for me. I cannot relate to what he had to say. I already couldn't relate to him while he was on Sam Harris's podcast, but I've heard so many people say, this Never Split the Difference is that's the book, and you got to read that. I'm like, man, not me. Terrible book. Sleeping pill stuff. Horrible. Just nothing, no substance there. And everything he says is like these empty terms that you have to understand the other side. No shit. Of course you do. And make sure that you have empathy with the other. You can't. You either have it or you don't, right? You either like the person or you don't. But none of this. You can fake to be interested in the other person, because if the other person is a boring person, you're just not interested. End of the discussion. There's nothing you can do. Okay, and it's like, just make sure you whatever. I mean, and I hear you say all these empty, just vacant, void statements that this book is full of. And I'm like, oh man, I could not do that. That book was not me in any version, the long version or the short version. Couldn't do it.
Oh man, that's a good take. Man, I love that book.
Really?
I've read it multiple times.
Well, you're also interested in basketball, so what the hell,
Yeah, well, don't hold that against me. So yeah, we've got a bit of a different view on this, I think, Gunnar.
Looks like it, yeah.
I do. You said you've either got it or you don't, and I don't really agree with that. I do think that it's a skill that you can develop, but number one, you got to want to develop it. And I should have said this earlier on. When we're talking about negotiating, you need to start from a place where you both want an outcome. You want something from this interaction, because, like you said, if you're just dealing with somebody who you find boring or reprehensible, or you don't want to be there, if there's no point in you having that conversation, then you're not going to have it. You're just going to say, why would I do this, right? So I take everything you've said, but in a situation, for example, in an international treaty where it's like you're representing a country and that country wants an outcome, it's the same as if, you're buying a car or something. Like, you want to buy a car and the salesperson wants to sell a car. So you're both there, and you might come up across these kinds of issues where you find the other person boring or the other person annoying or whatever it is. But because you are there and you want the outcome, that's where these skills come in that help you kind of push through those barriers that might be in your way and get an outcome that you want. So there's got to be something that brings people to the table.
The line between negotiations and sleazy sales tactics is very blurry. And it's. But the funny thing is, when you say car sales or wherever, I go somewhere and you're talking to a salesperson, and of course I've read all the. As soon as I hear a salesperson even use one of those things on me, I'm already out. Yeah. Because I automatically assume the guy thinks I'm a complete idiot for not knowing what he's doing, what they are doing. But oddly enough, the weird thing is that these tactics, these sales things seem to work. Otherwise, salespeople wouldn't do them, right? Because their livelihood depends on closing a sale. But trust me, with me, you use one of those things on me, and it's always the same stuff anyway, right? Asking you, faking interest in me and why I really want that blender and all this, what have you got at the moment and how much are you willing to, what's your, all this cheap, sleazy stuff seems to work, oddly enough. Either nobody has read any of these sales books, that's possible, and the people don't realize that. Yeah. But for me, it is such a turnoff. It is terrible. Like the negotiation very, very quickly stops. I mean, I even pull people up and say, "Hey, listen, please stop it with the sales here. You got to stop that."
The sales tactics. Yeah, but Gunnar, what you're talking about there is you're talking about psychological tricks to try and fool somebody into agreeing to something that they really don't want or shouldn't agree to, right? Now, that's not at all what I'm talking about. Like, that's the bad experience, and that is one of the things I think that people's minds can go to when you say the word negotiation, because they might have had a bad experience like that, right? So, so let me just say this as a really blanket thing. If you want a good and lasting outcome from any negotiation that you're involved in, do not use the sleazy mind tricks to get the short-term outcome, because they don't last. Particularly in something like an international agreement where, yes, you get the agreement, you get the thing signed, you get the resolution passed, but then you got to go back and implement that stuff. Let me give an example closer to home. If I'm a regulator and I strong arm or kind of use coercion or sort of forceful tactics to get a licensee to agree to something that isn't feasible for them, doesn't work for them, is not achievable for them, you feel like you get the win because you get agreement, right? So you negotiate an outcome and they agree to something. They then walk away and they either can't or don't want to then follow through with what they've agreed to do. You have to be really careful with those things. And I'm definitely not a believer in those kinds of tricks or tactics to get an outcome, because it's not going to be a lasting outcome. The sleazy tricks do work, but they are not good in the overall scheme of things. And I never recommend people use those sorts of things.
I know there's a difference between negotiations and sales tactics. Obviously, what I'm saying is there is a.
I think so,
there's a. The line is not a line. The line is an area. Is a zone.
Yeah. We do need to wrap up, and I think so. Just let me round out with a few other points that I had here. Another thing I want to mention is just, the importance of building rapport with who you're working with, particularly for these kind of longer lasting negotiations where you're going to have ongoing interactions with somebody. Another point is whenever I get stuck on something, so say you're in a salary negotiation, you're trying to negotiate an increase in your salary with your boss.
Yeah, why don't we?
Let's do it right now. Let's do a live example. If you get stuck on the number, for example, and you're not getting anywhere, right? You're just kind of banging up against each other. This is what I want. No, I can't do that. How about this? And you sort of doing that back and forth. Pivot to something else. Pivot to some other element of the agreement, additional leave or work from home flexibility. Pivot to something else that is not about that particular issue, and then see if you can come back to it. You might be willing to accept a lower salary, for example, if there's some other benefit that is brought into the agreement that may not have originally been on the table. People often question with international meetings like this, like, why do you all need to go together, particularly UNFCCC? Everyone's saying, I can't believe you're burning all this jet fuel to come to one place and talk about the importance of stopping climate change. But the reality is that it comes back to that point. We are humans. There are certain things that You just need to get in the same room with somebody and read the body language and be in proximity with somebody else and just talk things out that way.
And you can't drink tequila with anyone over Zoom, can you?
Exactly. And I should have said this before. Outside the negotiating rooms, that's where a lot of the negotiation actually happens. Over a glass of mezcal at the bar is often where things can be kind of worked out. I'm conscious of what I'm talking about here. You do have to maintain professionalism and you've got to stick to your guns with what you can agree to, obviously. But it's easier for me to discuss something openly and freely with a counterpart where I'm sitting there having a drink at the bar versus when I'm in the room with everyone's eyes on you. And the last point I'll make here is just you do need to know when to walk away. And so in international negotiations, we had what are called red lines, which are essentially like the non-negotiable aspects of any kind of an agreement. And they are fixed. They really can't move, but they are only one element of an agreement. It might be like, we can't move on this thing, but we can move on all these other things, right? And so that gives us the flexibility to maneuver on those other things. But you've got to know what your boundaries and what your red lines are, and you need to know when to walk away. So I'll leave it there. I'm hoping that there are some interesting or useful points that I've covered on there. And despite what you said, Gunnar, I would encourage people to go out and form their own opinion about those books that we read. Maybe start with the little summary version, and then if you like it, go up to the big one.
Yeah.
But
Also, while we were mentioning books, and you always sound so intelligent when you say, "Oh, I've read this book and I can highly recommend that everybody does." Right? Yeah, well, actually, there is one book that I have read several times, and that's Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I did buy that book for my girls. In the foreword of How to Win Friends and Influence People, he says that what made him write this book was that he realized in his career, and we're talking Dale Carnegie here, right?
Yeah.
Not short of a quid.
Yeah.
That even in, and this is what really hit it home for me, even in industries that are highly technical, like engineering, so I'm like, okay, the success in your career depends mainly on your knowledge in human engineering, so in human interactions, and only secondarily in your technical knowledge, which is great for someone who went to uni for 10 years, right? And I went to a technical university, and not one lecture was about the human engineering. So when I read that book, it was after I had gone to uni. I thought, okay, I didn't believe it, but it's true. It's very much true to a degree. Yes.
Right. Well, yes, we can leave it there. And I thank you, Gunnar, for indulging me. This certainly was an indulgence.
You're welcome. You owe me.
Thanks to anyone who's hung in there.
You owe me another Asset Sulfate Soil episode now.
That's a fair trade. No, I appreciate it. This was a little pet interest of mine that I wanted to talk about. Like I said, it was a really formative part of my career. I don't know if anyone who's listening has also agreed that it's been fun, but hopefully there's a few tidbits in there that are of interest.
We don't get many people contacting us, but please, if someone still is in this podcast, can I please ask you to flick us an email? Just contact us. We're easy to contact and say, number one, yes, I did actually listen to the very end. Okay. Well done, Gunnar, for hanging in there. I also want to hear that. And thirdly, whether you found this interesting or not. I want to know.
And if we get more than 5 people contacting us, Gunnar, you owe me a beer.
All right. Yeah, fair enough. A tequila. I get you a tequila.
Yeah, that's right. Take me back to Mexico.
All right. Leave it at that. Have fun. Bye.
Thanks, Gunnar. Have a good day. Bye.
Before I sign off here, let me quickly make a non-sponsored public service announcement. Southern Cross University and the guys from EAL Laboratories up on the Gold Coast are putting together another professional short course for acid sulfate soil. In my opinion, this is the best way of getting proficient in acid sulfate soil assessments. Listen to these guys. Lots of the presenters are, in fact, the authors of the 2018 guidance. If you listen to them carefully, listen to our 2 episodes, that'll get you going on the subject of acid sulfate soils. The course is held on the Gold Coast on the 28th and 29th of May 2026. Go there, sign up. It's a great course. You're going to have a good time. Spend a few days in Queensland and relax. So, over and out.